Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So today I'm working on a little tiny mini painting. I love doing these every once in a while. It's just incredibly satisfying to be able to sit down and create an entire painting and concept in one sitting. But this one, I had a frame, and you'll see it at the very end, but I wanted to take inspiration from that and create a painting that married well together with that and had one consistent theme. I actually really love creating paintings that are based on a frame to go together, and I actually do get a lot of inspiration from the frames and how they'll be displayed, but yeah, this one is a very tiny frame, so it's a tiny painting. I did make sure that when I was mapping out the exact size of this painting that it was a little bit larger than the actual dimensions of the frame so that it would completely fill it in. I wouldn't have any issues of it being slightly off center or anything like that. And yeah, I just taped it down on a larger piece of paper. That made it a lot easier to handle and make sure that it was really flatly taped down on my board. When I do that, it makes it a lot easier for it to not warp. And I was debating whether I wanted to do this painting in all gouache or if I wanted to do it in watercolor, and ultimately I decided on a combination of the two, which is really where I'd like to be working. That's a sweet spot for me, I think. I'm still getting the ropes of how to use gouache the way that I want it to, but for this one I decided to start off with the watercolor technique. Because it's so small, it's a lot easier to go in there with a micron pen and define areas that I want to be very sharp and precise. Whereas if I went 100% with my gouache, I would have really struggled in areas to be able to keep it as clean and clear as I wanted it to be. So by starting off with my technique of watercolor, I'm able to make sure that it shrinks down and scales really small a lot easier because I'm still learning. But I did want to go in with two different micron colors. I've been really enjoying tailoring the micron colors to what the object is going to be. So for him, I went with his clothing and his hair in black micron, and then his skin. And at first, his eyes I did in a red color. I wanted him to have a really iridescent isn't quite the right word, but almost a translucent redness to everything of his skin and his eyes. So I went in with this really bright red. I do end up going back over his eyes and potentially some other areas, I think his mouth as well, with the black micron, because I found that as I was painting, those areas got really washed out and it brought down the quality of his face. It was harder to read and see what was happening. So that's actually pretty easy to adapt. I found at first when I started using micron pens, I was really worried that I would use the wrong color and not be able to adapt it. But I found that for issues like this, or if I need to redirect it, it's actually pretty easy to be able to over and outline things again with a better color that suits it, especially now that I'm using gouache more. That's something that I can start really mixing together and make the gouache replace some of the line work in areas that I may have ended up going down a different direction. But yeah, that was just an adaptation thing where I just needed to tweak it as I was working on it to make sure that it read as clearly as I wanted it to. And at the very beginning, when I do the background wash, I knew that the color of his clothes was going to be darker. I wanted it to be almost a black. So I'm trying to paint a little bit smarter than I used to. In the past, I would only paint exactly where it needed to be. But I'm trying to think through the process of the way that really watercolor should be used is light to dark. So I can absolutely do one wash that fills up the background and his clothing if his clothing is going to be darker and it fits with that same color scheme. And I found that actually really helps. I don't have some issues where sometimes going around very intricate shapes, you can get where the paint starts drying in other areas, so you just don't get as smooth of a wash. You don't get that perfect flat wash. But when you cut out some of the intricate shapes that you have to paint around, it gets a lot easier to be able to maintain that really smooth flat wash. So for me, being able to think through where all the color is going to be and what's going to be happening, I can layer up in a much smarter way than I used to, and I actually really enjoy that. I like being able to make it work the way that I want it to. And originally, I actually wanted to do his hair as more of a light color, almost a white. And for some reason, it kind of went farther and farther away from that as I was painting it, and it became a black color. And in the end, I like where it does end up, and I think that I fixed some of the issues I did have with it, but I think that I would have liked it better had I found a way to make it work as a lighter hair color. But you know, ultimately, I think that some things like that, it just comes down to personal preference. There's really no right or wrong for that particular application, for this particular painting. Of course, there's a lot of paintings where if I use the wrong color, it imbalances the painting itself. But I think for this one, either hair color would have worked well. And then I came to painting the skin. And like I said, I did want it to be very red and almost luminous with that. I painted most of it. The base paint that I used for his skin was actually quinacridone rose red. That's a lie. It's quinacridone red. And this is one of my all-time favorite watercolor colors. And this is by M. Graham, by the way. I'll have a link to this specific paint in the description. But I use this one in the background as well so that they would tie together and they would have harmony to it. But since the background was mixed with Payne's gray, it was darker. So any areas that I'm using the quinacridone rose red, that is, there's both of those colors. And for a long time, I thought that I had bought quinacridone red or quinacridone rose, but I actually had owned quinacridone red. So quinacridone red is my favorite. I haven't tried quinacridone rose yet. Anyways, anywhere where I have that on his face, it will be the purest version of that color, and then the background will be more desaturated. So they'll still have that tied together, but there's a hierarchy to how that particular color is viewed in this piece. And then after I got most of the shadows laid down with that, I did go back in with some of that color with a little bit of purple mixed in for the deeper shadows, which I think that I really could have pushed some of the areas, particularly around his nose, to give it a little bit more depth and dimension to his face. But it did help in certain areas where I did add it, where I put it right underneath his neck where you could see the shadow of his chin. That really helped give it a little bit more depth to it. When it was just the red, it was really flattening out in that area. And then I finally got to the gouache. I did leave most of that till the end, but it came to the rescue for fixing his hair. I had a lot of issues with it from the paint job that I did with just the watercolors, where, like I said, I had intended for it to not be so dark, but it got that way, and then it became very nondescript. The details were gone, and it just was this blob. But I took my gouache paints, which I'll have a link down in the description as well, but I mixed a purpley gray, which actually, it's surprising how much of a difference just a hint of a color in your grays can help it harmonize. I went in with more of a neutral gray at first, and it really stood out. And then I went in with more of a purple gray, and it really looked a lot better. I loved how much more harmonious it was. But once I went in and I added more definition of where the hair was flowing, I instantly liked it much better than I did all along the way. But I knew that step was coming, so I was able to know that it would be redeemed and I would get to be able to have the chance to edit his hair and bring it back to what I wish it would have been, or at least adapt what it is now into something that actually would work. And then I got to add some really saturated details with my gouache. That's one of my favorite things about them, is that they contain a lot more saturation in the colors than watercolors have. But I have this one tube of paint that I bought separate from the set that I got that's called Opera Pink. And I was shocked at how incredibly bright this paint is. It's almost like a highlighter, but I love it. It's so impactful. But I went in with that to add a little bit of a hint of that really saturated color to the blood that's dripping down his face. But I really like that effect where it wasn't just straight red. It was really dark with this hint of pink peeking through. I also used that as the base for his eyes. I added a bit of red so it wasn't just very, very bright pink, but that pink really did lend a lot of saturation to that red, even where it just makes it almost look like it's glowing. It's an effect that is even more evident in real life than it is on film. I noticed that kind of a look tends to dull down, but I love how it looks with his eyes. This paint color is one of my favorites. With the gouache, that is. And one of the final details that I did to this, I finally was able to add a rim lighting. I absolutely love rim lighting. That's where there's a light source that is either right next to a figure or right behind it, so that it's just creating this really bright light halo around one edge of the painting, or of the object or the character, that is. And I love adding it in digital work, but I've always struggled with implementing it with watercolors. But with gouache, where it's opaque, I can go in there and add them at the very end. And I am so excited about that. I loved adding it into this painting. It really made the background feel like a sky and like it was an atmosphere, the way that I was able to go in with this pink color and give him this rim lighting. It really did bring all of it to life and connect it all. And I am so incredibly excited to be able to implement that more in all of my paintings, because I think that it really does give it so much more life and depth, and it makes the details that you do have there a lot more meaningful, like the backgrounds like this where it was just really abstract. Now it has purpose and meaning. And that is it for today. If you'd like to own this mini painting that comes with a frame and everything all ready to start displaying, I do have a link down in the description that'll take you over to my art shop. I also have a link of the tools that I use to create this painting listed below. But that is about it for today, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.